This is an excerpt from Desert Quartet by Terry Tempest Williams, and it would not be right to read Terry Tempest Williams without taking you to Canyonlands National Park. Earth, rock, desert. I am walking barefoot on sandstone, flesh responding to flesh. It is hot. So hot the rock threatens to burn through the calloused soles of my feet. I must quicken my pace, paying attention to where I step. For as far as I can see, the canyon country of southern Utah extends in all directions. No compass can orient me here. Only a pledge to love and walk the terrifying distances in front of me. What I fear and desire most in this world is passion. I fear it because it promises to be spontaneous, out of my control, unnamed, beyond my reasonable self. I desire it because passion has color, like the landscape before me. It is not pale. It is not neutral. It reveals the backside of the heart. I climb the slick rock on all fours, my hands and feet throbbing with the heat. It feels good to sweat, to be engaged, to inhabit my animal body. My destination is Druid Arch, by way of the Joint Trail and Chesler Park, located in the southeastern corner of Canyonlands known as the Needles. I have no map, only cairns to guide me. These hand-stacked piles of rocks that say, "Trust me, turn here, I know the way." Many resist cairns in the desert, kick them down, believing each traveler should walk on their own authority. It is also true some cairns have been designed to fool people, to trick them off the trail so they will become lost forever, a quick lesson in self-reliance, to never believe the stories of others. But I believe our desire to share is more potent and trustworthy than our desire to be alone. And so I do not anticipate these markers will lie. To walk in this country is always an act of faith. The cairns I have followed have not secured my own path to intimacy as much as they have given me the courage to proceed, one foot in front of the other in a landscape mysterious, unpredictable, and vast. Nobody really knows the way. That is the myth of convention. Cedar Mesa formations of sandstone envelop me. These pastel cliffs could convince you that you are a hostage with no way out. But the various shales, softer in character, create the slopes and benches to climb out of one canyon into the heart of another. Once I enter the Joint Trail, it is as though I am walking through the inside of an animal. It is dark, cool, and narrow, with sheer sandstone walls on either side of me. I look up a slit of sky above. Light is deceptive here. The palms of my hands search for a pulse in these rocks. I continue walking. In some places, my hips can barely fit through. I turn sideways, my chest and back in a vise of geologic time. I stop. The silence that lives in these sacred hallways presses against me. I relax. I surrender. I close my eyes. The arousal of my breath rises in me like music, like love, as the muscles in me tighten and release. I come to the rock in a moment of stillness, giving and receiving, where there is no partition between my body and the body of the earth. Throughout time and history, people have told stories of desert wandering. We tell them in holy books, we tell them in poetry, we recount them to one another. They exist in just about every world religious tradition that has lived somewhere where there has been a desert. They have put somebody in the desert and made them wander around it for a while. Everybody has. And that desert wandering can sometimes baffle modern people, those who have not been to the desert and wandered in it. It certainly baffled me when I was a child growing up in Wisconsin, where the desert was some sort of amorphous, out there, otherworldly thing that I could just not conceive of. And I think one of the reasons we have trouble conceiving of the purpose of the desert, or why people go wandering, or why all of those ancient religious traditions from Christianity to Buddhism, from Hinduism to Islam and Judaism, famous desert wanderers, why that is such an important story to tell and retell and tell and retell in all these different ways, because, well, it was revealed to me, this core of why we're confused about desert wandering, when I was trying to remember which passage of the Bible was Jesus wandering in the desert. And so, like any good seminary-educated minister, I Googled Jesus wandering in the desert. So glad I have all that student debt, so that I too can Google Jesus wandering in the desert. And you know how Google has those little suggestions of sort of, people also Google these things, and the top one that people also wanted to know was, what did Jesus do when he was wandering in the desert? What was he doing? What was he doing when he was wandering in the desert? And that tells me that that person has never wandered in the desert, because if you have ever wandered in the desert, you know that you don't really have a whole lot of time to do very much. When you are wandering in the desert, whether it is a literal one or a metaphorical one in your life, when you are wandering in the desert, you don't have a lot of time to feel bored or wonder what you're doing, because you are so focused on trying to not die, on trying to find your way through, on trying to find the next cairn that will point you in a direction, and trying to figure out if that's the right one to follow or not, on trying to figure out if you've got enough water until you can get to the next place you can get water. So the question, like, what was Jesus doing when he was in the desert? Speaks to the ways that we cannot imagine releasing the control that we would have to release to really wander in the desert, often until, though there are desert wanderers among us here, until life forces us to release control and wander a little bit. The word cairns is an ancient Scottish one, and cairns originally, in their form, were not these sort of hiking stone piles that you would find in the desert southwest, but cairns originally, and the first way that word was used, was that it was burial mounds. Enormous, just arresting piles of rocks, not stacks like that, but mounds the size of this room, stacked in concentric circles to mark a burial place, to mark a life, a holy place. But cairns on the trail also mark a little bit of death. Not necessarily of a person, but of possibilities. Because the tricky thing about choosing to go one way is that it can be hard to go back and re-choose the other. A colleague was recently telling me the story of going out to eat with her two young children, two sisters, and the older one, halfway through waiting for their food to come at the diner, suddenly, as if struck by lightning, realized that she desperately wanted what her little sister had ordered. Wailing ensued, gnashing of teeth under the table, the sort of behavior that if you've ever dined out with small children, you know this. Right? But the deed had been done. The server had been sent with the order. The kitchen was preparing the offending grilled cheese. It was a hard lesson in the ways that our ability to choose a path in front of us is both this incredible gift of free will and inevitably comes with leaving some things behind. And as we age, we leave things behind that are feel like a little bit more consequential than like the Mickey Mouse pancake that your little sister is going to get instead of you. But as Terry Tempest Williams reminds us, nobody really knows the way. That is the myth of convention. When I think about the false cairns in our life, those things that have been put in front of us that are not actually meant to lead us down the right path, how many of us have looked around at other people in our lives, in our communities, in our media, and thought, like, that's where I'm going. I want what that person has. That person's life seems great. And so then we make choices that we think are going to lead us in that direction. Because we think that person has their stuff together. But nobody really knows the way. That is the myth of convention. Which is why I love the phrase that she uses to describe what cairns have given her, both literally and figuratively in her life, that they have given her the courage to proceed rather than a certainty about destination. Because, and the maybe glib way I would rephrase that is that if anybody tells you that they know for sure where they're going to be in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, they know exactly what's going to happen to a business, to an organization, to a city, they are either lying to themselves or they're selling you something. And don't believe them. But we do need the courage to proceed. Because if you come to a cairn and you can't figure out which way to go when you're on a desert hike, those of you who have hiked in the desert, you know that the option to just stay there doesn't really exist. Because that's the surest way for the desert to kill you, is to just not go anywhere. And so I have been turning over in my mind that image, that courage to proceed. What is it and our lives and our communities that gives us the courage to proceed, to do what's next, to embrace the fact that we are not as in control as we would like it to be. And right, anybody who has ever tried to do anything that involves getting other human beings to do something knows that control is an illusion. Anybody who has ever parented knows that control is an illusion. Anybody who has ever taken care of an aging parent knows that control is an illusion. And that this terrible thing happens with human beings, and especially with children, whether they're 2 or 12 or 22 or 82, which is that the harder you try to force somebody to do the thing you would like them to do, the less likely they are to do it. That is a lesson. I wish I could say, that happened once in my journey as a parent, and then I learned the lesson and stopped trying to force my children to do exactly what I wanted them to do. But that would be a lie. Nobody really knows the way. Certainly not me. I think that is one of those lessons that we learn and then relearn and then unlearn and then relearn and then so on and so on for the rest of our lives. What gives you the courage to proceed? What gives you the courage to admit that you are not as in control as you would like to be? What gives you the courage to acknowledge that reality and still keep going? What gives you the courage to believe the cairn and what it's telling you and not get caught up, trying to wonder if it's telling you the truth, if somebody has said it there to trick you? What gives you the courage to proceed? A funny thing about us as Unitarian Universalists is that we have our identity is wrapped up in the idea that we get to bring our reasoning mind with us to our spiritual home. Many of you tell me that over and over again, that you feel like you don't have to check your reason at the door. You feel like you don't have to check your thinking brain at the door in order to have a spiritual home, and that is such a gift. But it does sometimes have this funny little shadow side, which is that we believe that if we think hard enough, we can figure it out, it being everything. That we can think our way through grief, that we can think our way through uncertainty, that we can, if we just think real hard, we will reason our way out of feeling lost. But that wandering is its own teacher, which is not to say that you should abandon reason, but it is to say that it is okay to feel unreasonable about the world you find yourself in. It's okay to feel uncertain, to feel lost, to feel like you are wandering. To speak to that, I will leave us with a much briefer piece of poetry from one of America's other great land-based poets, Wendell Berry. It may be, he writes, that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. And that when we no longer know which way to go, we have come to our real journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings. May all of your impeded streams sing. May it be so. Amen.